Last week, we did not publish our usual Thursday episode of the Ping Jockey Podcast because I was away in San Francisco. It is so refreshing to go to a new place, and for me, this was my first experience traveling alone. I was nervous in the beginning that I would feel awkward and, not having a companion, but I quickly learned that to travel alone means to follow your own compass, agenda, time frame, and any whim you want to follow. Exploring a new city is a thrill, and the people you meet along the way are equally as fascinating. For me, I met some incredible people from across the globe, and in knowing them for one short day, I was able to call them my friends, which is really something quite special. Or take, for instance, Mr. Fidler's anecdote in our previous podcast, where just by sitting in the hotel lobby, he met a well-known American author, which is something that could still happen today, but more likely back in his time period. But the reality of it is, when you open yourself up to the possibility of putting yourself out there, people will gravitate towards you, and you might make connections. Mr. Fidler, too, was traveling alone in a foreign country, but he quickly made friends and fearlessly explored the city and immersed himself in local culture. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Ping Jockey Podcast. I'm Marley, the co-host, sitting here with the Ping Jockey himself, Mr. Kenneth H. Fidler. So, this week we're going to continue to talk about his time in Mexico, and we're going to start when he got a phone call from a good friend of his. What happened that day, Mr. Fidler?
On March 4th, I received a phone call from Frank Romas from northern Mexico, who used to work with me at the Berkshire. He had just arrived in Mexico City for a visit and wanted to get together. We made arrangements to meet for dinner the following evening. We met at a nice restaurant and enjoyed a delicious dinner and great conversation, reminiscing over old times when we worked together in Reading. We were in the restaurant quite a while when all of a sudden Frank said to me, "We have already paid the bill. Let us leave now. Stick with me and don't hold back or stop."
Why?
We went out of there in a flash, and fortunately a taxi pulled up and whisked us away. When I asked him what that was all about, he said he overheard the three Mexicans sitting next to us. They were planning to rob us when we got outside, so we made our getaway just in time.
Well, that's not the best way to start a story about traveling alone. But that's not always the case, but thank goodness he had the wherewithal to be able to understand their Spanish and get you guys out of there. And the timing of the taxi couldn't have been better. So did you run into any other interesting people?
Yes, I did. On March 13th, the hotel dining room was quite full for breakfast, and a young man asked me if it was all right if he sat at my table. He turned out to be a Canadian fellow from Montreal. He was really friendly, and we talked quite a bit. I told him that I knew some people living in Montreal, and we discovered that he had some close friends who lived across the street from McPherson's. Small world, huh?
Isn't that something?
Yeah. Later that morning, I went on a sightseeing tour. A licensed guide picked us up at the hotel, and our party consisted of an elderly couple from Detroit and a Japanese fellow from Tokyo. They were usually 5 in the parties besides the guide, but we only had 4. So the guide stopped at his house and took his wife along.
Oh, wow.
I thought that was thoughtful of him. The guide was very nice and he spoke English very well. He told us that he had just won the lottery for 100,000 pesos. When the other guides saw him, they told their party, "There's the man that won all the money."
Wow, that's almost putting a target on his back.
Yeah.
How much did the tour cost back then?
The tour was real nice for $12. And we saw many beautiful places.
So you guys went someplace pretty cool. You went to the floating gardens.
Yeah, we then went to the floating gardens, which is considered the Venice of Mexico. We took a boat ride along a waterway where the boats were trimmed with flowers. Other boats were filled peddlers with sold flowers, blankets, and all sorts of souvenirs. There were even some boats with groups of musicians on them playing music for the other boats. It was a wonderful experience. Next we went to a fine restaurant for dinner. I enjoyed a delicious ham dinner covered with thick slices of pineapple. Because there was a lot of distance between these places we visited, we got to see a lot of beautiful countryside. It reminded me of a lot of the farmland when I used to deliver newspapers along more up and down rolling hills.
Isn't that interesting how when you go other places, parts of them always remind you of home?
Yeah.
So you also did some other pretty cool things while you were in Mexico and doing a little bit of traveling and stuff alone. You went to a bullfight.
After dinner, we went to see a bullfight. It started at 4 p.m., and it was said to be the only thing in Mexico that started on time.
Oh, that's hilarious.
Sure enough, at the stroke of 4, the parade of the Matadors preceded the bullfight. One had to be sort of bloodthirsty to thoroughly enjoy it. The bull ring was filled to a capacity and held 60,000 people. They killed 6 bulls, and each one took about 20 minutes. I think I took 2 rolls of film trying to capture their cultural tradition.
Wow.
I wonder whatever happened to those films.
Yeah, I haven't seen those photos.
Man, that drives me crazy.
Ugh.
A few times I went bowling at the Swiss Club, and Roy and his wife was a member of the Shrine, and they always have a get-together on the 3rd Tuesday of the month. They served us dinner, and then we did some bowling. Whenever something crazy happened in Mexico, people had the habit of saying that it can be only happen in Mexico. Well, I was beginning to agree with them. I met a man that night that told me about an unfortunate traveling experience.
What happened to him?
He took a train to another city in Mexico, and during his return, the train ran out of fuel in the middle of nowhere. So they sat for hours and waited for a relief train to tow them to Mexico City. Well, the engine finally came, and it so happened that the train was sitting on a curve, and the relief engine ran right into the train, head on, and then jumped the track.
Oh my gosh.
At that point, both engines were badly damaged, and so they waited longer for help. Pretty soon a train from Texas came along and nearly hit them as well. Soon after that, a train came along from the opposite direction and it had to stop too. Things were pretty well tied up and no one seemed to know what to do. Eventually someone came along with some horses, and the man I was talking to got on a horse and rode with suitcases in hands for 2 hours to a bus station.
Oh my goodness.
So much for public transportation. It could only happen in Mexico.
So the saying held true. It could only happen in Mexico. So even though you were having fun exploring the city and meeting new people, I'm sure you were still keeping in touch with Betty, like you said last time. And she sent you something for your birthday because you had to celebrate that alone in Mexico. So tell us a little bit about what happened with that.
Yeah, Betty sent me a package for my birthday. And the post office told me that I could pick it up, but I would have to pay $14 duty on it in American money. Betty had told me that the shirt wasn't worth a lot, and she had bought it on sale. So after a little thought, I told them to return it to the sender. So much for that.
Yeah, well, that wasn't the first issue you had with the post office. There was another little bit of a debacle that took place. Can you share the 1,000-step process to getting a package out of the post office in Mexico City?
Betty had baked some cookies and mailed them to me. I received them the day before, but it took a little work to get them. I got up at 9 in the morning on April 4th and had breakfast. Then I took a taxi to the post office, which was on the other side of town. When I got there, it was boarded up and the post office had moved. The taxi driver took me to the new address, which was at the opposite end of town. Well, I had finally made it to the correct post office, but I didn't speak much Spanish, so I had quite a time finding out where to get the package. Finally, I gave the card that I had received saying that there was a package at the post office to a Mexican man, and he took me to the 4th floor. I turned the card in at the window where they stamped it and gave it back, that I had to take it to another window and wait in line there. I finally received an invoice that they informed me that I had to pay 48 cents duty tax. I then took the card and the invoice down to the 2nd floor and gave it to the man who had sent me to the 1st floor to get the invoice stamped. Then I had to go back up to the 2nd floor and see the man again, and there I had to sign a book. I also had to sign the invoice up on the 4th floor when I paid the duty. Then another man took the card and got the package. When he gave me the package, I had to sign another book. Then we went back to the man with the first book, and he wanted to see my passport. Then he wrote the number of the package and the number of the passport in the book. And then after all that, we had to go see the custom man. I was surprised that he didn't open the package. Instead, he signed the invoice, and I was finally free to leave with the package. I gave the Mexican man a 3 pesos tip that made him very happy. I would probably still be there if he hadn't helped me. I wonder how much of an ordeal I would have to go through when I wanted to leave Mexico.
Yeah, if that's the kind of red tape you had to get through just for a package of cookies, who knows what it'll take to get out of the country. So you were having a really great time sightseeing and doing some other things, but you still were working, and you had a steady timeline to get out of there, but sometimes unexpected jobs came up. Can you tell me about one of those unexpected jobs?
Yeah, one day Roy and I were asked to go over to the mill next door. Our job was to re-level their machines. We did, and it was quite a job. By the time we finished, we had thin pieces of cardboard under the machines at one end and almost 4 inches of blocks at the other end of the machine to compensate for the lopsided sinking of the building, because a lot of times they have earthquakes and even buildings are sideways sometimes because they're sinking.
Oh, wow. So you had a pretty steady timeline. You were getting a little bit homesick, and you wanted to make sure you were going to be out of Mexico City, and by the time Steve was due to be born. So that was in late April, early May?
I checked with the airline, and they told me I'd better make reservations 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time. So I made my reservation that weekend for May 1st. Then if I got done early, or maybe I could have it changed. It sure felt good to make plans to go home. The time just didn't seem to be going fast enough. I'd killed half a day by going out to see the Guadalupe Shrine. It was a famous Mexican shrine, and it was quite interesting to see. I saw some of the poorer class people crawl on their hands and knees from the gates all the way up to the altar, which was a distance of about 2 city blocks. I took the poor man's trip out there. I went by bus. The bus ride took about a half hour each direction, and it cost 2 cents one way and 4 cents the other way.
Oh, they upped the price on the return trip. Huh. Yeah, because they knew you had to get back either way, so you were going to pay.
You have to watch where you go.
Yeah. Do you want to mention the horse race you went to?
Since I had been down there, I heard mentioned several times that they had beautiful racetracks there. So that afternoon I went to the horse races. It really was a beautiful place, and I enjoyed looking around and seeing how things were run. I bet 40 cents on 6 horse races, and I won 1 race, so I got most of my money back. It was fun, and it sort of reminded me of a fellow that wanted to sell us a furnace on Pear Street. The fellow arrived at our door, and he was reading a racing form that he had in his pocket. Can you imagine me walking around with a racing form in my pocket?
I don't think I can. I'm a little shocked by that, but maybe you thought your good luck would would be useful in that situation. Well, it sounds like you had just a really great experience in Mexico and got to meet some interesting people and just went where you wanted to and took advantage of the time you were there and saw a lot of great things and got involved in the local culture. I mean, going to the bullfight, the horse race, that's just, those are great memories. So next week we will pick up and discuss what it was like to wrap up his time in Mexico and to finally get home to Betty, Mary Beth, and the birth of his newborn son, Steve. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. I'm Marley, sitting here with the Ping Jockey, signing off.
Bye-bye.